They told me the night shift at the Riverside Mental Hospital would be easy money. Just sit in the security booth, monitor the empty halls, and make sure nobody breaks into the abandoned building. What they didn't tell me was why the previous 4 security guards quit within 2 weeks. What they didn't mention was the logbook entry from 1987 that simply read, "Some patients never left." 8 months unemployed, eviction notice taped to my door, credit cards maxed out. My sister offered to help with rent again. I told her I was fine. But accepting charity from someone 5 years younger would have meant admitting that at 32, I still couldn't figure out how to keep my life together. The Riverside job paid $15 an hour for sitting alone in a building that had been closed since 1994. Perfect for someone who needed money more than pride. Margaret Chen from the contracting company met me at the main entrance on my first day. Professional suit, clipboard, the kind of smile that meant business. The building stretched 4 stories above us, red brick facade with boarded windows and that institutional look that screamed government budget from the 1960s. "Simple assignment," she said, handing me a key ring and an employee handbook. 12-hour shifts, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Your job is to prevent break-ins and document anything unusual. The building is completely empty, so unusual means anything at all. She led me through the main lobby. Dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the few unboarded windows. Our footsteps echoed off marble floors that had probably been impressive once. Now they just looked tired. "There are some basic protocols you'll need to follow," Margaret continued, flipping through the handbook. "Nothing complicated. The county requires specific procedures for monitoring abandoned institutional buildings. Insurance liability, you understand." We stopped at a security booth near the main entrance. Glass partition, 2 monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the building, a logbook, and a telephone that looked like it belonged in 1985. "Your shift supervisor will contact you by radio," Margaret said, clipping a walkie-talkie to her belt and handing me one. "Dr. Williams oversees night security for all county properties. He'll check in periodically and provide additional instructions if needed." She opened the handbook to a page marked with yellow sticky notes. "Here are the basic rules. Pretty standard stuff, but the county takes compliance seriously. Rule 1, log all activities every 30 minutes in the official record book. Include time, location checked, and any observations. Rule 2, never leave the building during your shift unless specifically authorized by your supervisor. Rule 3, if you observe any individuals on the property between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., do not approach them directly. Radio your supervisor immediately. Rule 4, the 3rd floor is off-limits to security personnel. This restriction is absolute. Rule 5, if you hear voices or sounds from unoccupied areas, investigate from the security booth only. Do not leave your station to investigate audio disturbances." Margaret closed the handbook. Questions. Why is the 3rd floor off-limits? Structural damage from a water leak last year. The county hasn't allocated funds for repairs yet. She gathered her clipboard and briefcase. Dr. Williams will be in touch after 8 p.m. Have a good first shift. The building felt different after Margaret left. Quiet, but not empty quiet. The kind of quiet that made you aware of every small sound. I settled into the security booth and opened the logbook to the first blank page. 6:15 p.m., beginning shift. Building secure. All entry points locked. The cameras showed long hallways lined with doors. Each door had a small window, most covered from the inside with what looked like paper or fabric. The ground floor housed administrative offices and common areas. Second floor showed patient rooms and a nurse's station. The cameras on the third floor were dark. Structural damage, I said to the empty booth. At 6:30, I made my first round. The front desk area, the main corridor, the stairwell to the second floor. Everything exactly as expected. Dusty furniture covered with sheets, floors that hadn't seen a mop in 30 years, and that distinct smell of old buildings. Not unpleasant, just old. 6:45 p.m., first security round completed. No issues observed. The radio crackled at 8:17. Evening, Marcus. Dr. Williams here. How's your first night treating you? Professional voice, calm and friendly. Going well so far, Dr. Williams. Building seems secure. Excellent. I should mention a few additional details that weren't in the basic handbook. Nothing major, just some specifics about the Riverside property that will help you do your job effectively. I pulled out a pen and opened the logbook to a fresh page. First, you might notice the third floor cameras appear offline. That's intentional. The floor is sealed pending renovation, so monitoring isn't necessary. If you see any lights or activity on that floor, that's maintenance work. Don't be concerned. Understood. Second, we occasionally receive reports of trespassers in the building. Urban explorers, homeless individuals seeking shelter, that sort of thing. The county has an agreement with local law enforcement. If you encounter anyone on the property, your job is to observe and report, not to confront. Clear? Yes, sir. Third, the building's electrical system is partially functional. Lights work in most areas, but the heating system was disconnected when the facility closed. Temperature variations are normal. Don't interpret cold areas as evidence of structural problems. Dr. Williams paused. Any questions about these additional protocols? Should I be checking specific areas more frequently? Good question. Focus your rounds on the ground floor and basement level. Second floor checks can be visual from the stairwell, no need to walk the entire floor unless you observe something concerning. The basement access is through the door marked mechanical behind the nurse's station. 8:45 p.m. Contact with supervisor. Additional protocols received. My second round took me through the basement. Mechanical rooms, storage areas, and what looked like a kitchen that had been stripped of all equipment. The basement felt colder than the rest of the building, but Dr. Williams had mentioned temperature variations. Nothing unusual about an unheated building feeling cold in October. I was heading back to the security booth when I heard the piano. Not music exactly. Single notes played at irregular intervals. Slow, deliberate, like someone testing keys. The sound came from somewhere above me, either the second or third floor. I stopped at the base of the main staircase and listened. Another note. Then another. Definitely a piano. The radio felt heavy in my hand. Dr. Williams had said maintenance work might be happening on the third floor. But it was nearly 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. Seemed like odd hours for piano maintenance. I climbed to the second floor and stood at the stairwell landing. The sound was clearer now. Definitely coming from above, from the third floor. Individual piano keys played in no particular pattern, like someone learning to play or testing an instrument. The staircase to the third floor was blocked by a metal gate with a sign reading "Authorized Personnel Only, Structural Hazard." The gate was locked, but I could see the stairs continuing upward. Another piano note echoed down the stairwell. 9:25 p.m. Audio disturbance reported. Piano music from third floor. Presuming maintenance activity as discussed. I returned to the security booth and tried to focus on the handbook. The piano sounds continued sporadically until around 11 p.m., then stopped completely. At midnight, I heard my name. Not from the radio. Not from outside. From somewhere inside the building. Marcus. Clear as day. A woman's voice, calling from the direction of the second floor. I checked the camera monitors. Empty hallways, closed doors, nothing moving. But I definitely heard someone call my name. Rule 5 came back to me: if you hear voices or sounds from unoccupied areas, investigate from the security booth only. I watched the monitors for the next 10 minutes. Nothing. No movement, no additional voices. Just empty hallways and shadows from the few working lights. 12:15 a.m., audio disturbance reported. Voice from second floor. Visual inspection negative. The voice didn't return, but something else started around 1 a.m. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate walking from the second floor. The sound of hard-soled shoes on linoleum floors. I watched the second floor camera feeds, but the hallways remained empty. The footsteps were clearly audible, but whatever was making them wasn't visible to the cameras. I thought about calling Dr. Williams, but what would I report? Sounds without sources. He'd mentioned that trespassers sometimes entered the building. Maybe someone had found a way in that didn't trigger the camera system. The footsteps stopped at 1:30 a.m., right at the base of the stairwell leading to the third floor. 1:45 a.m., footstep sounds reported from second floor. Duration approximately 30 minutes. No visual confirmation. My shift continued without incident until 4:17 a.m., when I discovered the logbook entry that wasn't mine. I'd been writing in the logbook all night, documenting my rounds and observations. But when I flipped back to check my earlier entries, I found handwriting that definitely wasn't mine. Between my 1:45 a.m. entry and the blank page where I planned to write my next log, someone had written, "Welcome to Riverside, Marcus. Some of us have been waiting to meet you." The handwriting was feminine, careful cursive in blue ink. My pen was black. I'd never left the security booth for more than 20 minutes at a time, and the logbook had been with me during every round. I stared at the entry for several minutes. Dr. Williams had mentioned trespassers. Someone could have entered the building while I was checking the basement, found the security booth, and written in the logbook as some kind of joke. Urban explorers sometimes left messages in abandoned buildings. But the security booth was visible from 3 different camera angles. I would have seen someone approaching on the monitors. 4:30 a.m., unauthorized logbook entry discovered. Possible security breach. I radioed Dr. Williams. "Evening, Marcus. Everything all right?" "Sir, I found writing in the logbook that I didn't make. Someone wrote a message during my shift." Silence for several seconds. "Can you read me the entry exactly as written? Welcome to Riverside, Marcus. Some of us have been waiting to meet you. I see. Marcus, I need to ask you some specific questions. Have you left the building at any point during your shift? No, sir. Just moved between floors for security rounds. Have you observed any individuals inside the building or on the property? No, sir. Just the sounds I reported earlier. Have you shared information about your work assignment with anyone outside the security company? No, sir. Dr. Williams was quiet for almost a minute. Marcus, I'm going to share some information that wasn't included in your initial briefing. Information that most security personnel don't receive until they've completed several shifts successfully. I pulled out my pen and opened to a fresh page in the logbook. The Riverside Mental Hospital closed in 1994, but the closure wasn't due to budget cuts or changing healthcare policies. The facility was closed due to what the state classified as unexplained phenomena affecting patient care and staff safety. What kind of phenomena? Patients reporting interactions with individuals who weren't on the hospital roster. Staff members observing activities in areas that were supposed to be empty. Documentation appearing in patient files that no staff member had written. I looked at the mysterious logbook entry. The handwriting seemed even more deliberate now, like someone had taken time to make each letter perfect. The county maintains the building because selling the property has proven complicated. Potential buyers report unusual experiences during property tours. The security position exists to document ongoing activity and ensure that whatever remains in the building stays contained. Doctor, are you telling me the building is haunted? I'm telling you that some patients who died at Riverside appear to maintain a presence in the building. The state's official position is that these are unexplained environmental factors. My job is to ensure that qualified security personnel can monitor the situation safely. And the logbook entry? Probably written by Margaret Hoffman. She died in 1987 after 18 months as a patient. Staff described her as intelligent, articulate, and persistently curious about new people who worked at the hospital. 4:45 a.m., contact with supervisor. Additional facility information received. Situation classification updated. Dr. Williams continued. Marcus, the rules you received were designed to keep you safe while allowing you to document activity. I need to give you some additional guidance now that you've made contact. Made contact? Margaret writes in the logbook when she approves of new security personnel. It's her way of introduction. She's harmless, but she represents a larger population of former patients who remain active in the building. I stared at the cameras showing empty hallways. How many? Based on documentation from previous security personnel, approximately 12 to 15 individuals maintain a regular presence. Most are benign. They were patients here when they died, and they seem to consider Riverside their home. The piano sounds. Robert Chen. He was a pianist before his admission in 1983. He died during treatment in 1989, but he still practices most nights between 9 and 11 p.m. And the footsteps? Could be any of several individuals. They're curious about you, Marcus. New security personnel represent a change in their routine. They like to observe and evaluate. Dr. Williams paused. The question is whether you want to continue this assignment now that you understand the full scope of the situation. I thought about the eviction notice, the empty bank account, my sister's increasingly worried phone calls. $15 an hour to sit with ghosts seemed better than 15 applications for jobs that wouldn't call back. What exactly would I be documenting? Interactions, patterns of activity, any changes in behavior. The county needs ongoing records to maintain the property and ensure that the situation remains stable. Previous security personnel have provided valuable information about the individuals who remain active. And it's safe. The individuals in this building were patients, not criminals. They're dealing with the same mental health issues they had when they were alive, but they're not aggressive or dangerous. Think of them as residents rather than threats. 5:15 a.m., shift continuation confirmed. Assignment parameters updated. The rest of my first shift passed quietly. No additional piano music, no footsteps, no new logbook entries. I finished my final rounds at 5:45 a.m. and sat in the security booth watching the sunrise through the boarded windows. At exactly 6 a.m., Dr. Williams radioed one final time. "Marcus, how do you feel about returning tomorrow night?" I looked at the logbook entry in Margaret's careful handwriting. "I think I can handle it." "Excellent. Your second shift will include a more detailed briefing about the specific individuals you may encounter. Knowledge helps with understanding their behavior patterns." 6 a.m., end of shift. Assignment continuation confirmed. I locked the building and drove home thinking about Margaret Hoffman, who'd been dead for 37 years but still took the time to welcome new employees. The world felt different somehow, like I'd discovered that the rules I thought governed reality were more flexible than I'd assumed. My second night started the same way. Margaret Chen met me at the entrance with the keys and radio. We exchanged pleasantries, and I settled into the security booth as the sun set behind the building. Dr. Williams called at 8:30. "Good evening, Marcus. Ready for a more comprehensive understanding of your colleagues?" Colleagues? That's how I've learned to think about them. You're all working in the same building, just on different schedules. He was right. It did make the situation feel less strange and more like a workplace with unusual circumstances. Margaret Hoffman, who wrote in your logbook last night, was admitted in 1985 for severe depression and anxiety. She was highly intelligent, held a master's degree in literature, and worked as a librarian before her illness became unmanageable. She's curious about people and likes to read over your shoulder. If you bring books or magazines, don't be surprised if they're moved or rearranged. 8:45 p.m., personnel briefing received. Margaret Hoffman profile documented. Robert Chen, our pianist, was a professional musician before developing schizophrenia in his late 20s. He's mostly harmless, but he gets agitated if he feels his practice sessions are being interrupted. If you need to check the second floor while he's playing, move quietly and don't linger near the music room. Is there still a piano up there? Room 237 has an old upright that was left behind when the hospital closed. The county decided it wasn't worth the cost to remove. Third person you might encounter is David Martinez. He was a patient from 1988 until his death in 1992. David was admitted for severe obsessive-compulsive disorder and had specific routines he needed to follow every day. He still follows those routines. You'll recognize his presence by the sound of doors opening and closing in sequence. He checks every door on the second floor in the same order every night. 9 p.m., additional personnel profiles documented. As if on cue, I heard the first door. Click. A door opening somewhere on the second floor. then closing. Then another door opening. Then closing. I watched the camera monitors. The hallway remained empty, but I could hear each door clearly. Open, close, pause, move to the next door, open, close. Methodical and precise. "That's David starting his rounds," Dr. Williams said through the radio. "He'll spend about 40 minutes checking the entire second floor, then move to the basement. He might visit your security booth during his basement rounds. Don't be alarmed. He's checking doors, not investigating you." The systematic door checking continued exactly as Dr. Williams described. Methodical, patient, thorough. Each door given the same attention, the same brief pause, then moving on to the next. I found the rhythm oddly comforting. Fourth individual is Sarah Kim. She was 16 when she was admitted in 1990. Sarah had severe anorexia and died from complications in 1993. She's the youngest of the active residents, and she tends to be shy around new people. You might see lights flickering in patient rooms on the second floor. That's usually Sarah. How do they interact with each other? They maintain the same social dynamics they had when they were alive. Margaret takes a maternal interest in Sarah. Robert prefers solitude but tolerates David's routine checks. David doesn't interact much with anyone, but he's not antisocial. Think of them as roommates who've been living together for 30 years. 9:30 p.m., additional personnel profiles documented. Door checking sequence initiated second floor. I made my first round while David continued his systematic door inspection. The basement was noticeably colder tonight, and I found myself moving more quietly than usual. Not from fear, but from a growing sense that I was sharing space with people who deserved basic courtesy. When I returned to the security booth, I found a folded piece of paper on my desk. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, and covered with handwriting I recognized from the previous night's logbook entry. Margaret's careful cursive filled both sides of the page. "Dear Marcus," it began. "I hope you don't mind that I've been reading over your shoulder during your documentation. Your handwriting suggests someone who thinks carefully about what he writes. I appreciate precision in record keeping. Dr. Williams has probably explained our situation by now. I want you to know that we understand this assignment is unusual, and we appreciate your professional approach. Previous security personnel have ranged from dismissive to frightened. You seem thoughtfully curious, which is refreshing. A few things that might help during your shifts: Robert plays Tuesday through Friday, usually starting around 9. He's most comfortable if you stay on the ground floor during his practice time. David's routine takes him through the entire building, and he will check the security booth door. He won't enter unless invited, but the door check is part of his pattern. Sarah rarely approaches new people directly, but she enjoys observing from a distance. If you bring reading material, I'd enjoy the company. We hope you'll stay. Good security personnel are difficult to find. Regards, Margaret Hoffman. I read the letter twice, then carefully placed it in the logbook. Dr. Williams was right about thinking of them as colleagues rather than supernatural phenomena. Margaret's note felt like a welcome memo from HR. The radio crackled. "Marcus, have you encountered any unusual activity tonight?" Margaret left me a note. Very polite. That's Margaret. She has excellent manners. What did she tell you? I summarized the letter's contents. Dr. Williams listened without interruption. She's given you good advice. Margaret has been here longer than any of the other active residents, and she understands how to make the arrangement work smoothly. Anything else happening? David's still checking doors. I can hear him moving through the second floor systematically. He'll reach the basement in about 20 minutes, then finish with the ground floor. After midnight, the building usually settles into a quieter pattern. Most residents are less active between midnight and 4 a.m. 10:15 p.m., written communication received from Margaret Hoffman. Professional courtesy established. At 10:45, David's door-checking routine brought him to the security booth. 3 soft knocks on the door, then the handle turned slowly. The door opened about 6 inches, paused, then closed again. No one visible, but the precision of the action matched everything Dr. Williams had described about David's methodical nature. I made a note, door check completed by David Martinez. Procedure followed as described. Around 11:30, I noticed the lights flickering in room 219 on the second floor camera feed. Brief flashes, like someone was turning a light switch on and off repeatedly. The pattern seemed random at first, but after watching for several minutes, I recognized a rhythm. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes. SOS in Morse code. I radioed Dr. Williams. Sir, I'm seeing light patterns in room 219 that look like Morse code. SOS signal repeated several times. That would be Sarah. She learned Morse code from her father, who was a ham radio operator. SOS doesn't indicate distress in her case, it's her way of saying hello to new security personnel. She's acknowledging your presence. Should I respond somehow? If you know Morse code, you could flash your flashlight in her direction. Standard greeting would be appropriate. I didn't know Morse code well enough to send a proper response, but I aimed my flashlight at the window of room 219 and flashed it 3 times. The SOS pattern stopped immediately, replaced by a series of quick flashes that seemed almost excited. She's pleased that you responded, Dr. Williams said. Sarah doesn't communicate with everyone, so consider that a compliment. 11:45 p.m., contact established with Sarah Kim via light signals. Morse code communication confirmed. The building grew quieter after midnight, exactly as Dr. Williams had predicted. Robert's piano practice had ended around 11 p.m., David had completed his door-checking routine, and Sarah's room remained dark. I used the quiet time to read through the employee handbook more carefully, looking for details I might have missed. In a section titled Documentation Standards, I found a subsection that hadn't been marked with Margaret's yellow sticky notes, Special Circumstances Protocol. Security personnel may encounter situations that require documentation outside standard incident reporting. When documenting interactions with facility residents, use objective language and avoid speculative interpretations. Focus on observable behaviors and direct communications. Previous security reports are available for reference upon request. Facility residents. The handbook acknowledged them in official language. I was reading through the protocol section when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I turned around to find a woman standing just outside the security booth. Mid-40s, graying brown hair, wearing what looked like a hospital gown from the 1980s. She had intelligent eyes and a gentle expression that seemed familiar from somewhere I couldn't place. I hope I'm not interrupting your reading, she said. Her voice was the same one that had called my name the previous night. I'm Margaret. The rational part of my mind knew I was looking at someone who had died 37 years ago. The practical part of my mind noted that she seemed polite and professional, exactly as her letter suggested. Good evening, Margaret. Thank you for the welcome note and the letter. You're handling this better than most new security personnel, she said, settling into a chair across from my desk as if this were a perfectly normal workplace conversation. May I ask about your background? Dr. Williams mentioned you have experience in security work. Some experience. Mostly I just need steady employment right now. Margaret nodded sympathetically. Economic necessity brings many people to unusual situations. I worked as a librarian before my admission here. The transition from public service to institutional life was challenging. Dr. Williams said you have a literature background. Master's degree. University of California, 1979. 20th century American literature. I was working on a thesis about institutional narratives in contemporary fiction when I was admitted. Rather ironic, considering where I ended up. She gestured toward the employee handbook. I notice you're reading the documentation protocols. That section was added after several security personnel requested guidance about how to report their experiences here. How many security guards have worked this shift? You're the 7th in 3 years. The first 2 lasted less than a week each. The third stayed for 6 months before transferring to a different assignment. The fourth was with us for almost a year, lovely man named James who brought crossword puzzles and let me help solve them. The 5th and 6th were less compatible with our community. What makes someone compatible? Margaret considered the question carefully. Respect, mainly. We're still people, even if our circumstances are unusual. Some security personnel treat us as problems to be managed or phenomena to be feared. Others understand that we're simply residents with different needs. 12:30 a.m., direct interview conducted with Margaret Hoffman. Community dynamics discussed. Margaret, may I ask you about the other residents? Dr. Williams gave me basic information, but I'd like to understand how you all manage day-to-day life here. We've developed routines over the years. Robert needs his practice time. Music was his primary coping mechanism when he was alive, and it still provides stability. David requires predictability and order, so we all accommodate his checking routines. Sarah is still quite young emotionally and needs gentle interaction. I try to maintain some intellectual stimulation for myself through reading and writing. Do you remember being alive? Of course. Death didn't erase our memories or personalities. We simply exist differently now. I remember my admission, my treatment, my death in 1987. But I also remember every day since then. Time moves differently when you don't sleep or eat or age, but consciousness continues. Are you happy here? Margaret smiled sadly. Happy is probably the wrong word. We're comfortable. This was our home when we died, and it remains familiar. The alternative, whatever comes after, seems more uncertain than staying in a place where we understand the rules. Have you ever tried to leave the building? Early on, yes. But we're connected to this place in ways that make departure difficult. The building holds us, but gently. It's not a prison, more like roots. We belong here. 1 a.m. Extended interview with Margaret Hoffman. Resident perspective on facility connection documented. Over the next hour, Margaret told me about their informal community structure. Robert practiced piano most evenings and sometimes played requests if asked politely. David maintained a detailed mental schedule of building maintenance needs and would leave notes about problems he observed during his rounds. Sarah had developed an interest in electronics and was responsible for the light patterns and occasional radio static that previous security guards had reported. "We don't have traditional jobs," Margaret explained, "but we each contribute to maintaining the building and making it function as a living space. Previous security personnel have been helpful partners in that effort." "What kind of help?" "Small things, mostly. James would bring library books that I requested. He helped David create a written checklist for his door-checking routine, which reduced his anxiety significantly. Sarah appreciated having someone acknowledge her Morse code communications. "And the current security arrangement works for everyone? Dr. Williams understands our situation and advocates for our needs with the county administration. The security position provides documentation that satisfies bureaucratic requirements while giving us reliable human contact. It's a practical solution." Around 2 a.m., Margaret excused herself to check on Sarah, and I returned to my regular security rounds. The building felt less empty now, more like a shared workspace. I was making my way through the basement when I encountered David. He appeared at the end of a hallway, methodically checking the last few doors in his routine. Average height, thin build, wearing hospital scrubs and carrying a clipboard that looked as insubstantial as he did. When he noticed me, he stopped and consulted his clipboard. "Security personnel," he said to himself, making what appeared to be a note. "Tuesday night, 2:17 a.m., basement level." "Good evening, David," I said. "I'm Marcus, the new security guard." David looked up from his clipboard. "Marcus. Tuesday through Saturday shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Assigned to building maintenance observation and incident documentation." "That's right. I need to inform you about maintenance issues I've observed during my rounds." He flipped through several pages on his clipboard. "Ground floor, loose handrail on main staircase, third step from bottom. Second floor, intermittent electrical problems in rooms 223 and 237, water stain on ceiling near nurse's station suggests possible leak. Basement level, temperature inconsistency in mechanical room, possible HVAC system maintenance required." I pulled out my pen and notepad. "Should I report these to Dr. Williams?" "Yes. Proper maintenance documentation prevents larger problems. Previous security personnel have been helpful in communicating building needs to administrative oversight." David returned to his clipboard, made another note, then continued his systematic door checking. I added his maintenance observations to my logbook, thinking about how each resident seemed to have found ways to contribute meaningfully to their shared living situation. 2:30 a.m. Maintenance issues reported by David Martinez documented for supervisory review. The rest of my second shift passed quietly. Margaret returned around 3 a.m. with a book, a worn copy of Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, and settled into the chair across from my desk to read. Sarah's room remained dark, but I occasionally caught glimpses of soft light moving past the windows, as if she were walking around with a small flashlight. At 4 a.m., I heard Robert playing piano again. Not his usual practice session, but something different. A slow, melancholy piece that seemed more personal than practice. Margaret looked up from her book. "Robert doesn't usually play this late," she said. "He must be having a difficult night." Does he have bad nights often? We all do. Mental illness doesn't disappear after death. Robert still struggles with the symptoms that brought him here originally. Music helps, but some nights are harder than others. The piano continued for about 20 minutes, then stopped abruptly. Margaret closed her book and stood up. I should check on him, she said. Thank you for the pleasant conversation, Marcus. I hope you'll consider staying with this assignment. 4:30 a.m., resident welfare check initiated by Margaret Hoffman. Community support system observed. Dr. Williams called at 5 a.m. for the end-of-shift check-in. How was your second night, Marcus? Much better. I had extended conversations with Margaret and David. Brief encounter with Sarah through light signals. Robert seemed to be having a difficult evening. Margaret mentioned Robert's late-night session when she contacted me earlier. She's concerned about his emotional state. That's the kind of community awareness that makes this arrangement work effectively. They really do look out for each other. They've had 30 years to develop their social structure. It's quite remarkable, actually. Most institutional mental health settings struggle to create the kind of mutual support system they've established naturally. Dr. Williams, can I ask you a question about the bigger picture? Of course. How many other places like this exist? Dr. Williams was quiet for several seconds. That's a complicated question, Marcus. The state maintains several former institutional buildings with similar, ongoing situations. Each facility is unique, but the basic challenge is the same. How do you manage property that can't be sold or demolished because of active paranormal residents? Paranormal residents. That's what you call them officially. The state prefers unexplained environmental factors, but those of us who work directly with these situations use more practical terminology. These are people, Marcus. They have needs, personalities, relationships. The fact that they're dead is less relevant than the fact that they're still actively living in state-owned buildings. 5:30 a.m. End of shift consultation. State oversight structure discussed. I finished my final round, locked the building, and drove home thinking about Margaret's intelligence, David's methodical care for building maintenance, and Sarah's shy but creative communication attempts. They weren't ghosts in any traditional sense. They were residents dealing with mental health challenges while living in an unusual housing situation. My sister called that afternoon while I was sleeping. Marcus, I haven't heard from you in a few days. How's the new job going? Better than expected. It's night security at an old building. Quiet work, but steady. Are you okay? You sound different. Different how? I don't know. More settled, maybe. Like you're not as worried about everything. She was right. The constant anxiety about money and employment that had been eating at me for months felt less urgent. Not because the problems were solved, but because I'd found work that felt meaningful beyond just paying bills. The job is working out well. I think I'll be staying with this assignment for a while. That's great. I'm proud of you for sticking with it. After we hung up, I realized I hadn't thought about my eviction notice or credit card debt once during my conversation with Margaret. Having steady work was part of it, but there was something else. I felt useful in a way I hadn't experienced in other security jobs. My third night established what would become our regular routine. Margaret would arrive around 10 p.m. with a book and settle in for conversation and reading. David would complete his rounds between 9 and 11 p.m., stopping by the security booth to report maintenance issues and confirm that building security was functioning properly. Sarah would communicate through light signals, gradually becoming more elaborate in her patterns as she grew comfortable with my presence. Robert would practice piano most evenings, occasionally taking requests if I wrote them down and left them on the second-floor nurse's station. Dr. Williams called this arrangement managed cohabitation, and it worked remarkably well. I documented their activities for the county. They helped me maintain building security and identified maintenance needs, and we all benefited from regular social interaction. 3 weeks into the assignment, Margaret asked me a question that changed how I understood the situation. "Marcus, have you given any thought to the long-term nature of this position?" We were sitting in the security booth during a quiet Thursday night. Margaret was reading a biography of Emily Dickinson that I'd picked up from the library, and I was updating my logbook entries. I hadn't really thought about it. Dr. Williams said it was ongoing work. It is. But I want you to understand what ongoing means in our context. We've been here for 37 years, Marcus. Robert died in 1989, David in 1992, Sarah in 1993. Time works differently for us, but we're aware of its passage. We've watched dozens of security guards come and go. Some stay for weeks, others for months. James stayed for almost a year before requesting a transfer. She closed the book and looked at me directly. The question is whether you're prepared for a position that could last decades. Because that's what we need, someone who understands that this isn't temporary work. Decades? The county has no plans to sell or demolish this building. We're not going anywhere. The security position exists to provide ongoing documentation and human contact for residents who will be here indefinitely. If you accept that reality, this job offers unusual stability. If you're looking for career advancement or change, you might want to consider other options. I thought about my previous jobs. Retail positions that lasted until stores closed, security contracts that ended when companies changed providers, temporary assignments that lived up to their name. The idea of work that could continue for years, even decades, was both appealing and daunting. What happened to James? Why did he transfer? James was offered a promotion to day shift supervisor at a different county facility. Better pay, better hours, more conventional work environment. He chose career advancement over community continuity. Did he regret leaving? Margaret smiled sadly. He visited once, about 6 months after his transfer. Said he missed our conversations and David's maintenance reports. But he also said the new position offered better opportunities for his family's financial security. I understood his choice. And you're asking me to think about staying long-term because we've grown to appreciate your approach to this work. You treat us as colleagues rather than curiosities. You take David's maintenance report seriously, you respond to Sarah's communications, you bring library books that I actually want to read. That kind of professional courtesy is rare. I made my midnight round while thinking about Margaret's question. The building felt more like home than my apartment did. I knew which stairs creaked, which rooms had the most reliable lighting, where David would be at any given time during his rounds. The work was unusual, but it was also meaningful in ways that conventional security positions weren't. When I returned to the security booth, I found a note from Sarah on my desk. Written in careful block letters on notebook paper, "Thank you for Morse code responses. Most security guards ignore my signals. I hope you stay. Sarah left you a message, Margaret observed. She's usually much more reserved with new people. How long did it take for her to warm up to James? Several months. Sarah was 16 when she died. Social interaction was already challenging for her due to her eating disorder and the medication she was taking. Add 30 years of institutional life and the unusual circumstances of our existence, and she's naturally cautious about trusting new people. But she trusts you, Robert and David. We've been her family for 3 decades. We understand her communication style, her emotional needs, her triggers. She knows we won't abandon her or judge her. I looked at Sarah's note again. The handwriting was careful and deliberate, like someone who'd put significant thought into each word. What would happen to her if I left? She'd adjust, as she has before. But it would be painful for her. Sarah forms attachments carefully, and each departure reinforces her fear that people will inevitably leave her. Around 1 a.m., Dr. Williams called with an unusual request. Marcus, I need to discuss a situation that's developed at another county facility. Are you available for a brief consultation? Of course. We oversee similar arrangements at 3 other former institutional buildings in the county. The security guard at the old tuberculosis sanatorium in Millfield has requested a transfer, and we're having difficulty finding a replacement. The situation there is more challenging than Riverside. More challenging how? Larger resident population, more complex social dynamics, and some individuals who are less cooperative than your current colleagues. The previous security guard lasted 6 weeks before requesting reassignment. Are you asking me to transfer? I'm asking if you'd be willing to spend 1 night per week at Millfield while we recruit a full-time security guard for that facility. Your experience at Riverside suggests you might be effective in managing difficult paranormal resident situations. I looked across the security booth at Margaret, who was pretending to read while obviously listening to my conversation. Can I think about it? Of course. But I should mention that the additional assignment would come with a significant pay increase. $25 per hour for Millfield shifts, with overtime compensation for any week you work more than 40 hours total. $25 an hour. That would not only cover my rent and bills, but actually allow me to start paying down credit card debt and building some savings. Financial security I hadn't experienced in years. I'll let you know by tomorrow night. Excellent. Oh, and Marcus. The residents at Millfield have specifically requested a security guard who has experience working cooperatively with paranormal populations. Your colleagues at Riverside may have inadvertently qualified you for specialized work. 1:30 a.m., additional assignment opportunity discussed. Financial implications significant. After Dr. Williams signed off, Margaret set down her book and looked at me seriously. He offered you work at Millfield. You heard. We all heard. Sound carries in old buildings, and we've learned to pay attention to conversations that might affect our situation. She paused. Millfield is a difficult assignment, Marcus. The residents there died under more traumatic circumstances, and they haven't developed the same cooperative community structure that we have here. What kind of traumatic circumstances? Tuberculosis sanatorium operated from 1923 to 1956. Thousands of patients died there, many of them young people who were essentially warehoused until death. The emotional atmosphere is much more volatile than Riverside. But you think I should consider it? Margaret was quiet for several minutes. I think you should make the decision based on your own needs rather than our preferences. But I also think you should understand that accepting additional work at other facilities would change your relationship with this community. Change it how? You'd become part of the county's paranormal management system rather than Riverside's security partner. Different role, different expectations, different emotional investment. Around 2:30 a.m., David stopped by the security booth during his nightly rounds. Instead of just checking the door and moving on, he knocked and waited for permission to enter. "David, come in. How are the rounds going tonight? Systematic inspection complete. Building maintenance status acceptable." He consulted his clipboard. "I need to discuss the Millfield assignment opportunity. You heard Dr. Williams too. Sound carries through building ventilation systems. Millfield Sanatorium has structural and population management challenges that exceed Riverside's complexity." David flipped through several pages on his clipboard. Millfield resident population, approximately 47 active individuals. Riverside resident population, 4 active individuals. Millfield facility size, 6 buildings totaling 180,000 square feet. Riverside facility size, single building, 45,000 square feet. That's a lot more space and people to manage. Additionally, Millfield residents include individuals who died from infectious disease rather than mental health treatment. Different psychological profiles, different institutional experiences, different social dynamics. "David, are you advising me not to take the assignment?" "I'm providing relevant data for decision-making purposes. Personal recommendation: financial benefits are significant, but job complexity and emotional stress factors are proportionally higher." He made a note on his clipboard. Also, divided attention between 2 facilities would reduce security effectiveness at both locations. Current Riverside arrangement functions optimally with dedicated personnel. After David continued his rounds, I spent the remaining hours of my shift thinking about the choice Dr. Williams had presented. More money meant financial security, debt reduction, and long-term stability. But it also meant less time at Riverside, more complicated work relationships, and responsibility for a much larger and more challenging community. At 5 a.m., Sarah's room began flashing a complex light pattern I hadn't seen before. Long and short flashes in what seemed like a deliberate sequence, repeated several times before stopping. I radioed Dr. Williams. "Sarah's sending a light signal I haven't seen before. More complex than her usual patterns. Can you describe it?" I did my best to recreate the sequence from memory. "That's Morse code for, please stay." Sarah rarely sends messages longer than a few letters, but she's been practicing more complex communications recently. She's expressing an opinion about your assignment decision. She wants me to stay at Riverside rather than taking the Millfield work. That would be my interpretation. Sarah doesn't form attachments easily, but when she does, they're very important to her emotional stability. 5:30 a.m. Communication received from Sarah Kim regarding assignment decision. Resident preferences documented. I finished my shift with more questions than answers. The additional money would solve immediate problems and provide long-term security. But leaving Riverside, even partially, would mean abandoning a community that had come to trust and depend on me. When I got home, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. No postmark, no return address, just my name written in familiar cursive handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message from Margaret. Dear Marcus, I hope you'll forgive the presumption of writing to you outside our usual workplace interactions. I wanted to share some thoughts about the decision you're facing. James faced a similar choice when he was offered his promotion. The financial benefits were significant, and the career opportunities were clearly superior to continuing at Riverside. He made the rational decision for his circumstances, and I respected his choice. But I want you to understand what we lose when security personnel leave. We lose continuity of care, institutional knowledge about our needs and behaviors, and the comfort of established relationships. Each departure requires months of adjustment as we learn to trust new personnel. More importantly, you would lose something as well. The work you're doing here is meaningful in ways that conventional security positions aren't. You're providing essential services to a population that has no other advocates or support systems. That kind of work changes how you see yourself and your place in the world. The choice is yours to make, and will adjust to whatever you decide. But I wanted you to understand the full implications before you commit to a path that might take you away from work that clearly suits your temperament and skills. Whatever you choose, thank you for treating us with dignity and respect during your time here. That means more than you know. Sincerely, Margaret Hoffman. I read Margaret's letter 3 times, thinking about her phrase, work that clearly suits your temperament and skills. She was right. The Riverside assignment challenged me in ways I hadn't expected, but it also satisfied needs I hadn't recognized I had. The work was meaningful, the community was genuine, and the long-term stability was exactly what I'd been seeking without realizing it. That evening, I called Dr. Williams before starting my shift. I've made my decision about Millfield. I appreciate the opportunity, but I prefer to continue working exclusively at Riverside. I see. May I ask your reasoning? The work here requires my full attention to be effective. Splitting time between facilities would compromise the quality of service I can provide to both communities. And the financial considerations are important, but not more important than job satisfaction and community relationships. Dr. Williams was quiet for several seconds. Marcus, I think you've made the right decision. The Millfield assignment would have been financially beneficial, but it would also have been professionally isolating. Few people can handle multiple paranormal resident communities without experiencing emotional burnout. Will you find someone else for Millfield? Eventually. The county is developing a training program for security personnel who want to specialize in paranormal community management. Your success at Riverside is part of the justification for expanding these services. When I arrived at Riverside that night, I found Margaret waiting in the security booth with a pot of tea and what appeared to be a celebration. I heard about your decision, she said as I settled into my desk chair. Sarah wanted to participate, but she's still too shy for group activities. However, she did contribute this. Margaret handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside was a detailed drawing of the Riverside building with small figures visible in various windows. Each figure was labeled, Margaret, Library, Robert, Music Room, David, Maintenance, Sarah, Electronics, and in the security booth window, Marcus, Security. She spent all day working on it, Margaret said. It's her way of saying you're part of the community now. I looked at the drawing again. Sarah had included details I hadn't even noticed about the building, architectural features, landscaping, even the specific pattern of the security booth windows. But what struck me most was how she'd drawn all of us as equally important parts of the same structure. Margaret, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret staying here instead of moving on to whatever comes after death? Margaret considered the question carefully. I regret the circumstances that led to my death, and I regret the mental illness that brought me to Riverside originally. But I don't regret choosing to remain in a place where I can contribute meaningfully to a community. Even though you're tied to this building indefinitely. Marcus, most people are tied to places and circumstances by necessity, habit, or fear. I'm tied to this place by choice and by relationships that matter to me. That's not a compromise, it's a commitment. Over the following weeks, our routine evolved into something that felt less like a job and more like a calling. Margaret and I read books together and discussed everything from 19th century literature to contemporary politics. David provided detailed building maintenance reports that the county actually used to allocate repair funds. Sarah gradually became more communicative, eventually progressing from Morse code to written notes to brief spoken conversations during her bravest moments. Robert began playing requested songs and even composed a few pieces specifically for our evening entertainment. The work was exactly what Dr. Williams had described: ongoing documentation of paranormal resident activities, building security, and liaison services between the community and county administration. But it was also something much more valuable. It was meaningful work with people who appreciated professional competence and personal respect. 3 months into the assignment, my sister visited my apartment and commented again on how different I seemed. "You're not anxious all the time anymore," she said. "Even when we talk about money or future plans, you sound confident instead of worried." She was right. The constant financial anxiety that had dominated my thoughts for years had faded into manageable concern. I had steady income, health insurance through the county, and work that I genuinely enjoyed. But more than that, I had found a place where my skills and temperament were exactly what was needed. "The job is working out well," I told her. "I think I'll be staying with this assignment for the long term." "What kind of security work keeps you so engaged? Usually you get bored with jobs after a few months." I thought about how to explain Riverside without sounding like I'd lost my mind. "It's community-based security. I work with the same people every night, and we've developed good working relationships. The environment is challenging but stable. Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You seem like yourself again for the first time in years." After she left, I realized she was right. The person I'd been before months of unemployment and financial desperation was someone who valued meaningful work over high pay, community connection over career advancement, and long-term relationships over short-term opportunities. The Riverside assignment had allowed me to remember who I actually was rather than who I thought I needed to become to survive economically. 6 months into the position, Dr. Williams offered me a promotion to Senior Security Coordinator, with responsibility for training new personnel at all county paranormal facilities. The pay increase would be substantial, and the career advancement opportunities were significant. I thanked him for the opportunity and declined. "Marcus, may I ask why you're turning down a promotion that would nearly double your salary?" "Because the work I'm doing now is exactly the work I want to be doing. More money and more responsibility aren't improvements if they take me away from a job that's already satisfying." "And you're comfortable with the long-term implications of that choice?" I thought about Margaret's letter, Sarah's drawing, David's systematic care for building maintenance, and Robert's evening concerts. I thought about meaningful work with people who appreciated professional competence and personal dedication. Dr. Williams, I've never been more comfortable with a professional decision in my life. A year into the assignment, the county conducted its annual review of the Paranormal Resident Management Program. As part of that review, I was asked to provide a detailed assessment of the Riverside community's stability and service needs. I wrote a 15-page report documenting the residents' activities, social dynamics, communication patterns, and building maintenance contributions. I described their individual personalities, their mutual support systems, and their cooperative approach to sharing space with security personnel. I recommended continued funding for the program and suggested expanding similar services to other county facilities. But what I didn't include in the official report were the personal details that mattered most. Margaret's intellectual curiosity and maternal care for the other residents. David's meticulous attention to problems that prevented larger maintenance crises. Sarah's gradual development of confidence and social skills. Robert's music, which had evolved from solitary practice sessions to community entertainment that we all enjoyed. I didn't write about how much I looked forward to coming to work each evening, or how the conversations with Margaret had expanded my understanding of literature and history. I didn't mention that David's systematic approach to problem-solving had influenced how I organized other aspects of my life, or that Sarah's patient communication efforts had taught me new ways to connect with people who experienced the world differently than I did. Most importantly, I didn't document how the work had changed my understanding of what made a job worthwhile. It wasn't about career advancement or salary increases or professional recognition. It was about finding work that matched your